Hey everybody, welcome to another wonderful episode of 30-Minute Worlds. We're so happy to have you with us. But first, we're going to give you guys a little bit of news on our production schedule moving forward for 2021.
We started this podcast producing one episode every 2 weeks, which is realistic for us. And then when quarantine hit, we moved into producing an episode weekly, which is a lot of fun and really allowed us to pump out some worlds, a lot of which were crap.
Oh, yeah.
Some of which were really good.
Our producers told us the percentage of crap worlds rose by over 200% this season, which, since we've doubled our episode production, is great for us.
That's really good. We're putting out, it's about content that matters, not quality. But
that's right.
As quarantine wears off, we're going to go back to the old schedule of releasing episodes once every 2 weeks.
Yep, nature is healing, the boys are going out in public, we got vaccinated, we're stockpiling supplies for the, inevitable Chinese invasion. We're ready to go.
For the second wave.
That's right.
Yeah. So without further ado, enjoy our revisit, the long-awaited revisit of the Mendican Gate, and we will see you guys in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening.
Well, boys, what do you say we cut through the bullshit? No banter. We get right into it.
What?
A banterless podcast.
Is he allowed to do that? Is he allowed to cut through the bullshit?
That's
this
right.
Power.
Hold on. I gotta consult the. I gotta consult the
bylaws.
Yeah, there's nothing in the book that says he can't cut through the bullshit.
That seems unfair to me.
It's never been tried until now. The sea of bullshit was too deep.
If we're doing it, I would like to voice my dissent, but
Sea of Bullshit does sound like an episode of our show.
It does say in the bylaws that you are allowed to officially lodge your dissent in the form of 4 hours of digressive bullshit.
Could I actually? Can I get a VRBO for my assent?
What?
I need to. Was
that meant to get a laugh? Is there like a person who's listening to that and he's like, "Ha!
Wait, what did you say?"
I feel like my goal of cutting through the bullshit is being undercut right now.
It is, actually.
Yeah,
this is a brilliant political move by me.
There's actually nothing in the bylaws that says we can't do this. So
Belvin's trying to get the filibuster removed.
Yeah, I'm getting filibustered right now. I want to get into it because we have a special show today.
That's right.
We are returning to a past world. We are unearthing the treasure and refining it, turning it from shit to gold.
It was gold already, and we're polishing it into burnished gold.
Gold to burnished gold. Very good.
Exactly. New listeners, if you're starting here, you actually should scroll all the way back down through our catalog, which is the Sea of Bullshit that Dan described, and click on Season 2, Episode 2, The Mendican Gate, because that is the world that we're revisiting today. Once you're all caught up, you can start off right here.
Right, so when we revisit a world, we try to basically flesh it out, to take interesting and intriguing concepts from the first one and make them more full, to explore things that went unexplored before. And what we've done is each of the lads has gone and taken a section of the world, which was, as you know, because you've listened to it, a riff on what if in the American expansionist West, devils interceded and offered contracts and tricked and troubled their way to basically escalating every conflict that was already there in the bloody West. I took the devils. So I thought about their true nature and some of the mechanical stuff with them. And I'm Belvin. Are we saying our names?
Yeah. I'm Walt, although you already know that because I'm the only person you remember on this show. I've been there since day one.
The main character.
Talking to you. Sort of the protagonist of the show.
Planting ideas in your head.
Well, what did you take?
I picked the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, an important faction in our emergent desert war that we described last episode.
One might call them the protagonists.
You could. Yeah, it fits perfectly.
And Dan, I took for my area of interest the government in the East, in the brewing antebellum United States. The devil's interference in the activities of the country have made things a lot I think it'd be harder to make a country on the brink of civil war worse, but they've managed it.
And I'm Zach, and I got Native Americans, and actually, I could just in general, but I just ended up focusing on mostly the Utes.
So, let's just dig right in. I'll start because I did some thinking about the devils, and if I recall correctly, and by the way, I want y'all to be jumping in, throw out any ideas you have, any criticisms, suggestions, etc. Want this to be collaborative, even though we have different sections. I think all we established in the first episode is that the devils are sort of from a parallel dimension that's sort of crystalline, and a little more gray, and that there's something that they get from this world, in addition to having the mechanics of putting contracts in front of people and having them fulfill the contracts in exchange for boons, which usually just end up escalating conflict. Like, it leads to dark things, as a deal with the devil usually does. That's that right?
I think we touched on like why they would want to be in our world. And like generally, it's that our world is more entertaining to them. Right?
Yeah. So I thought more about the motivation, and let me know what y'all think of this. So the world that the devils hail from, and of course they aren't devils because this isn't like they're from hell. The world they're from is sort of more purgatorial than anything. It's very cold and featureless and entropic by default. But they're always probing. The entities within this realm are always probing to break into another realm. And they get energy, they get vitality from psychic distress, psychic energy,
Nice.
and to a certain extent physical energy. I'll get into that later. But at the start, it's psychic. So
they kind of feed off fear.
And they're not
other
physical beings themselves, right? They don't have bodies.
Where they're from has different rules of physicality, but I want to establish that eventually they can get corporeal form in this world. But it's not.
That's interesting. So this actually dovetails kind of well with Mormon mysticism, which I did some research on. According to Mormon tradition, there existed, before even like God existed, a number of like what were called spirit intelligences that didn't have bodies. And these eventually became human souls. They participated in the war in heaven between God and Satan. And those among them who sided with God became humans. They got physical bodies. I kind of workshopped the Mormon explanation for these creatures is that these were ancient spirit intelligences that sided with Lucifer and were not rewarded with physical bodies, and that God sealed them away with their master in America, a promised land that humanity would eventually discover when they were spiritually ready.
Sure. That's a fun in-universe explanation from the Mormons. And possible. I mean, I don't think it's interesting to say like exactly the origin of the dimension, but just knowing that there's this dimension. I don't think of them as evil because they don't really comprehend it that way, but they are mischievous in a bloodthirsty kind of way because that's just what fuels them.
They care nothing for human life.
The principal motivation is to create anguish and suffering, basically.
Right. I mean, the things that we see as suffering and also the things we see as sin are tasty to them. So they're drawn in that direction. But theoretically, they do get some energy from strong emotions like joy. They just get like less.
I think a more enlightened idea about good and evil is to think about them as selflessness and selfishness.
Sure.
It starts to get tied up if you say that a one god is good and one god is evil. Right.
I think that's a good way to think about it. And I guess in that spectrum, they are extremely selfish and therefore quite bad. Right. I think that the natives would have pre-existing contact with them and think of them as like dark trickster spirits. I don't think that they'd be seen as like the devil, because that wouldn't be the cosmology that the Native
Right,
Americans
not
would
at
be
all,
approaching
yeah.
from.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, I think they definitely have a much different relationship with devils than white people have. Just because they have a different frame of mind about it, right?
yeah, and they could
Mhm.
also maybe have some metaphysical protection set up. I'll let you get into that when you get to your section, or you can think about that now. But I think the natives would be prepared to a certain extent.
I think Native American mythologies in general have a slightly healthier relationship with like trickster elements in their mythologies, whereas like a puritanical Christian faiths tend to like absolutely decry like Satan, the devil. Like if you're ascribing these sort of emotions to basically selfishness and not inviting any selfishness into you, then you're turning that into a taboo, and it's actually going to be kind of damaging on your site. It's going to have a lot more power over you.
Yeah, I think it's important, the context of the religiousness of the settlers. Like, I think that only helps the devils in their purpose.
That, and I think too, though, that a lot of the people that went out west kind of weren't necessarily all that religious, right? So you either got hyper religious people, but you also have people who are kind of tired of the puritanical or stifling elements of the East and just wanted land and just wanted to make their
I
way
did
out
mean
there.
more just like
Yeah.
the context of Christian society and all of the mores thereof.
Yeah.
But yeah, there would be more people who sort of supersede that, want to be amoral and successful, and they would be easy food for the devils. I think the mechanics of the contract and the boon, we established this on paper.
It's a physical thing that can be destroyed, yeah.
I think that happens because of Mendicus, the guy who opens the gate. I think Mendicus is into like some alchemical stuff. He has like some tarot on him, some like some like aspirational deal with devil stuff on him. Like not really accurate, but you know what an inspiring magician would have on him.
Yeah.
And so the form that they first take in terms of the contracts is physical, is like an actual contract you sign. And perhaps you get 3 days of boon, and then you have to sign the contract or not.
Oh, I see. A trial period.
Yeah, and people almost always sign because the trial period is so fun.
Yeah, it's so lit. It's neat because the contracting process, like no one would ever admit to really doing it. So it makes sense actually that in setting, not a lot is known about who's contracted and who's not. There's a lot of superstition or rumor about who is. But since these are documents that are actually hidden, the whole process would be very secretive, I would think, because no one would be like, I did it, and here's my thing. Here's my shit that I signed.
Right.
And just to throw out the last thing I thought about, I do think eventually they would gain corporeal form. I think there'd be a bit of a feedback loop where as they like feed on people and their psychic energy, it's kind of like a gray person getting doused with color. They start to like just like absorb some humanish elements, like maybe in their realm. They start to play act like Western robber barons a bit. And so some people who get especially doused with this stuff want to have like form, physical form. So they manipulate people into setting up rituals in certain areas. Like maybe the American South, there's a swamp that there's another gate set up. And those devils feed on physical energy. So like the Civil War would be something the swamp devil would be encouraging, because
so there's two cadres of devils.
Yes, I mean the devils, they're physical devils and non-physical devils. Physical devils come later, and they benefit from physical energy.
Yeah, they're cranking up the physical violence.
I think there would be a devil in physical form who works with William Randolph Hearst on trying to strip mine as much as possible.
And we can talk about that more later, but that actually fits into something I'd been considering for Bleeding Kansas as well.
Okay,
well,
great.
it's funny too. There are so many meteoric business rises around this time of people like Hearst and stuff. You could easily attribute that to a supernatural cause, actually.
Right.
Yep.
So you kind of established now that there's there's at least 2 portals. The first one,
A second one will open. It's probably not open yet.
right around. It's probably around the time like Bleeding Kansas is a good mark.
For the listener, we officially set the setting, by the way, in the year 1859.
There's just too much good shit that happens in 1859. It's a really nice like closing point for us.
What we established now is we have these 2 gates. The first one is the one that Mendicus like accidentally opened with his magician bullshit in 1855?
1845 in Pikes Peak, around that area of Colorado.
Right. Yeah. Which there was a gold rush in Pikes Peak in the real world in like into the 50s. So this is like an early gold rush that
brought Mendicus there. Yeah.
Brought Mendicus there. That gate is a thinner gate, like, or it's a more tenuous connection. Like they can't come through as readily. So I think what happened is that later in like probably around maybe the end of Bleeding Kansas, or
which is where we're at now. I would say 1859, the present day of the setting.
Yeah,
right around James Brown. Did I say James Brown?
I want to set it shortly. I want John. I have an idea for John Brown's raid in the immediate aftermath that I want to work with.
So do you think that the second portal opened like very soon before John Brown's raid, or because of John Brown's raid?
Ooh. Delvin, what do you think?
Y'all are deeper into the history of this area than I am, so I'm neutral right now. Until you explain more of what you're talking about.
I was promised I would never have to look at any history for this historical setting.
I don't want to get too gritty on it, but like the sort of locus of this entire story is the nature and location and timing of the portal. So I just wanted those to be totally nailed down.
I mean, to me, it's not even that important.
Is there anything like with devils, Belvin, do you think, if somebody cuts a deal with a devil and then leaves the vicinity of the gate, or just like, I want to know what the scope I can involve the boons, like dealing in boons with, because I want to talk about stuff with like in the East, like government people getting in the thrall of.
That happens.
Yeah,
I think if you want to find the devils, you have to go out west. But once you found them, you can carry the magic anywhere. I think that draws a lot of people to the west too, which is interesting for conflict.
I think it'd be like how spores can travel along the wind and go to different places. I think it starts at the epicenter, but maybe there's some contagion type element of like if someone has a devil deal and they go east, like the people around him are susceptible. And
I like that. I can work with that.
Well, I figure the second gate was actually a gambit by a devil that had gotten a very strong hold of someone and was creating this physical portal, like a physical portal to bring devils like physically more physically through than just like psychically through.
I think it might be nice just narratively if Mendicus, that original fuck up, ends up just fully possessed and becomes an agent of them.
I like it more if Mendicus is like, we don't know where he is, and we know of him, and we know that he did it, because the devils attribute, according to them, they attribute the opening of the gate to Mendicus, but like he's kind of gone and people are looking for him.
Well, yeah, we don't know where he is. He's like the Dark Wanderer, right?
Right. Like the Mormons are hunting him because they believe he's the Antichrist, and they think he's like, it's their job to punish him. We could settle on where Mendicus is, but I think it's not as important as like the rest of the setting, to be honest.
I thought maybe mechanically to set up these physical portals, like in the southern swamps, in William Randolph Hearst's office, etc.
I think he was definitely in Mexico City at the end of the Mexican-American War.
Yeah, Mendicus like wanders.
Oh, you just see photos of him in historical events that go really bad. It's like it. Like
Yeah.
Pennywise.
I like
Yeah.
that. I like that.
He's the man comes around.
Just
kind of
like
deal.
spooky guy in the foreground. I want to move on to one of the other deep dives, Chessman and Waltz. Which of you would like to go next?
I can go. Well, actually, it makes more sense for Chessman to go.
Yeah, I have a few ideas about. I mean, first of all, I kind of just want to relay like just the history of like the Utes in Colorado, which is where the original portal opened.
Okay.
Is really interesting. I picked up this book, "Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee," which has an account titled "The Utes Must Go." Which, I mean, to summarize it, essentially, they put this guy, what's his name? Essentially, they put this guy, Nathan Meeker, in charge of, in a word, like civilizing Native Americans in Colorado, which of
gross.
course didn't work because they were already civilized.
Yeah. Was he with the Indian Bureau or?
Yeah, he was running essentially. I could think about it kind of like a mission. He tried to get them to like plant shit and like use draft horses and shit, but
And
like
that didn't work. Yeah.
in like the 1540s, they got horses from Spain, and they've been nomadic ever since. I mean, they weren't even nomadic before that.
There
without
were,
horses.
obviously, like the fallacy of like trying to civilize, the Native American people was that like they had agriculture and civilizations that were more Western, kind of like, the Cahokia Empire, like east of the Mississippi. But that model of civilization didn't really hold up as well west of the Mississippi. And they were living kind of the life that, with their limited technological means, it was like optimal for them to live.
Well, I mean, I don't know is that true, Walt? Because my understanding is that
Colorado and Utah were not farmland. They really were bad land to settle.
Sure. Just the whole idea of like the technology aspect. They had good technology. It's just Native Americans were essentially living in a post-apocalyptic scenario once we really got here. Because 90% of them had been decimated by plague and illness.
Yes.
I think what Walt means is that like they can't support large population centers.
Yeah,
like,
in order to turn the soil of Colorado into arable soil to farm would require advancements that not even the United States had made at that point in history. Yeah, we didn't, like New Mexico was like and Arizona were like the last states to be populated until we finally figured out how to irrigate them correctly so they could actually farm. So that's more what I meant.
Okay.
That was how gold rushers and homesteaders like they would set up shop on, basically it was like an open plain. They'd be like, oh, it's free land, no one's using it. And then before a year had come around, the Utes would roll up like, what the fuck? This is our this is our pasture land. Yeah. It's like, well, I didn't see you here. It's like, okay.
But it's
they have to move around to different pastures to keep their horses fed.
It's funny to think about it as them believing that they're coming out and civilizing the land when they're literally living in houses made of dirt, and they can only burn animal dung. Like they have no fuel for fires. Like, so we go west and live in like dirt houses and
the worst conditions and farm in the stupidest way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Chessman, what's the setting unique take on the Utes? Like, how are they changed by being in this scenario?
Gun blades.
Well, that's the frame. That's the frame of this. Is that it's actually, I don't think it's really that big of a change to say that following the opening of this gate, everyone blamed the Native Americans. There was a quote I found somewhere. They called them Red Devils, and it got me thinking. Maybe they actually think that Native Americans, at least around this gate, are physical manifestations of devils.
There was a crazy amount of distrust of the Indians because it's funny, we perceived them as breaking treaties with us all the time, and they perceived the same thing about us. In reality, tribes like the Utes and the Comanches were divided into a number of like sub-tribes, sometimes even with their own languages. And when the U.S. government would sign a treaty with, say, like the Comanches, we would assume that we were signing it with the whole tribe. So then when another group of Comanches attacked us, we would be like, oh, the Comanches broke the treaty, so we're going to dishonor this treaty with them. And it was just kind of this crazy cycle of like racial hatred and misassumptions about each other's modes of living.
Yeah, seven. I think the Utes were 7 bands at the time that they went to Washington to negotiate a treaty, essentially. Mm-hmm. And then they just named one of them the chief of the entire tribe, despite the fact that there were 7 other chiefs there.
Yeah, the Western idea of statehood and government doesn't really account for that, like, sort of societal structure, I guess.
I feel like we're getting into real history a lot here, and I think we should tie the devils into this.
So I was just thinking about how the devils could intercede here. One angle could be like inflammation of anti-native rhetoric, but that's less interesting to me because like it's already at a 10, right? Like our history with natives is already so bloodthirsty that I don't even like see what's different.
The highlight of the Indian Wars. Yeah.
One angle could be that the native tribes have ways of curing devilry, or ways of maybe breaking contracts or something like that.
Perhaps ancient rituals that they brought over from Israel, where they're from.
Veto.
These Mormon powers.
Perhaps there's an interesting conflict where like there's still all the racism and mistrust, but like people realize that the natives have like real expertise in the matter. So there could just be some interesting friction there.
All right, I'll try to avoid getting too bogged down in cliff notes of actual history, because there's just a couple things that I want to talk about. But like, so the gate opens in 45, the Mexican-American War kicks off literally the next year. So I think that's the first exposure a lot of the devils have to our society, and especially to the conflict and what it can do for them.
Right. And they're like, oh, this is delicious.
Yeah. So I think Mendicus has to be involved in the American expedition to Mexico.
Oh, hell yeah.
And so that is led by a guy named Zachary Taylor, who becomes president later on. So I think basically that's the first exposure. And the reason that's so important is that like everybody important in the Civil War, like all the major generals, like pretty much cut their teeth in Mexico. And I think how this ends up happening is Mendicus acts as basically like a liaison or like an advisor to Taylor against Santa Anna. And all of this culminates in the fall of Mexico City, which, to cut a long story short, when Santa Anna lost the city, he let 30,000 prisoners that were just being held captive in the city loose. And I think the idea that I had was that instead of that being something that was motivated just by historical like stuff here, that a devil that had basically welded itself into the American expedition cut a deal with all 30,000 of those prisoners. Their freedom, like in exchange for half of what was left of their lives.
Interesting.
I think the fall of Mexico City in this gets a lot bloodier, a lot faster because of that.
That's kind of them testing the like limits of what their chaos causing can kind of do too.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting, when you said a devil embedded in the American expedition, do you know who also was in the American expedition?
Longstreet, Pickett,
Lincoln, as well as Robert E. Lee, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like on both.
So if you want to attach or get these historical figures into contact with devils, perhaps the American expedition to Mexico was the devil's introduction to a lot of men who would later become prominent military men and political leaders.
Exactly. I think that is how it spreads its way back east into Washington.
Yeah, I agree.
Inserts American propaganda scenario where Lincoln is offered a contract. Says, no,
I think
I'm far too honest.
If Lincoln could take a contract to like resolve the Civil War issue in one way. I think there are certain things like the Civil War that are so complicated the devils can't solve them. I think that makes sense, right?
Well,
Yeah.
they don't want to. They just try to escalate it.
Yeah.
Right.
So Scott and Taylor are the two big leaders. And the idea that I had was that, like, if a devil had presented itself as the Archangel Gabriel to them, it was like,
Ooh.
there's going to be a great war in the United States, a cleansing, and we'll make Taylor, in this case, King of the North, and Scott, King of the South, because Winfield Scott and Taylor are from the South and North, respectively. I think that Taylor refuses him, and that's why he dies so early into his presidency.
Ooh.
I like that.
So Taylor
The honorable man, Zachary Taylor.
becomes
and
president.
his tariff reform, the one thing he did.
Well, I think that once the devils make their way into Washington, I think all the Southern representatives, a lot of them are going to cut deals for money, basically, for their plantations to flourish.
Yeah.
Right.
I think Thaddeus Stevens, who is the leader of the Radical Republicans, cuts a deal for charisma, basically. And I think they're a stronger faction. And I think abolitionists are stronger in this.
Yeah.
Because that drives the tension up really high, even more than in our world, where it's already going crazy. And then the violence ends up getting expressed directly in Bleeding Kansas, which is, I think, culminates basically in John Brown's raid, which he lost historically because he had like 30 guys, and in the raid, 23 of them were like became casualties. Nobody joined up with him. I think in this, he cuts a deal with the devil, basically for, I don't know, I guess like a supernatural luck almost. And I think
a supernatural ability to command,
Yeah. And I think he wins. And I think when he wins at Harper's Ferry and he repels the federal government, that all of the abolitionist elements of Kansas, all the free staters flock to him. And he basically forms an army and starts raiding Missouri and recruiting slaves like into his army. So I think
that's super interesting because you know who had a big presence in Missouri? The Mormons. They, while they were in the official like state of Deseret, which is, for the listener, the Utah territory, they called it a state. The federal government refused to recognize it as a state for a long time because they were worried about its weird cultiness. They came from Illinois and from the area around Independence, Missouri, and they still had strong footholds there.
Yeah. Well, because Kansas...
They were also staunchly pro-slavery, actually.
Yeah. Well, the Kansas territory is sandwiched between what we would call Deseret and Missouri. And what would happen is that people would come over from Missouri and pretend to be from Kansas, like pro-slavery people, and they would vote in the elections in Kansas. So I think that like this sort of like John Brown ruled Kansas on the like doorstep of the Civil War is this almost third or fourth faction influence like around the gate, like in Pikes Peak.
That's interesting because it gives the Mormons too. If the abolitionists want to use the devils and abolish slavery, the Mormons are opposed to that on two fronts because they want to keep slavery and they want to get rid of the devils. So there's a huge ideological conflict there.
Yeah. So I think I don't really think that going into necessarily too much detail about the East is all that about like the East Coast, because we know what's happening there. Like, we're driving towards the Civil War. Tensions keep racketing up. I think the place that it has the most direct impact is the place where the most violent struggle is happening, and that is Kansas at the time.
Yeah, and I mean, we could say, I think that's interesting. The whole John Brown succeeds, forms a slave liberating army. Perhaps the Civil War happens in a more chaotic fashion, and therefore more bloody fashion.
I have an idea for that, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, go on.
We talked a lot about like people from the States who have made deals with devils, a lot of white people. I was reading something about, Geronimo. His family was killed by by a Mexican force in like the 30s or something. I don't remember. That's like the 30s, and then he spent like the next 40 years leading an offensive against, like, it depends, you know, the Mexicans, the United States, like a war for independence.
Sure.
Part of the account was hold on, I need to find it again. Okay, at least this is what Apache tradition says. He was burning his family's belongings before heading into the forest, and he says he heard a voice that told him that no gun will ever kill you. I will take the bullets from the guns and I will guide your arrows. Which it feels like it could be a contract.
Yeah, well, I love the idea because the devils can support righteous causes too, so long as it escalates conflict. I love the idea of sort of like Django Unchained style, like revenge porn type happenings with the various downtrodden and the rebellions, the naval alliances, like all of that just becoming more successful and more vengeful.
There's definitely more fuel for that fire. Yeah. And there's odds of success, or your odds are way higher.
I think that there would be way more slave rebellions in this antebellum nascent confederacy than there were. Because in real life,
which means a more militarized South, which means when the Civil War does happen, the South is actually more prepared because they've been fighting all these slave rebellions. That's scary, actually.
Yeah, maybe there's one devil who's just been paying attention the whole time and making sure the two forces are super evenly matched. So it'll last the maximum amount of time.
I do think that there's a written contract which is like more ironclad. It's an idea from people from the East. It's a white person idea to have a written contract. So, but the idea of a verbal contract is a lot less, like, there's a lot less leverage that the devil could use in a verbal contract. It is kind of like a curse of the genie sort of thing, where like, I'll grant your wish, but I'll grant it, I'll twist it. But at the same time, there's nothing to rip up. There's
no way you can die, theoretically.
I think that partially fueled by the power of this verbal contract, Geronimo actually has more success creating a pan-native front.
Right, it's all more successful.
Right. And at the start of the Civil War, it's like there's three like nations now.
Not so fast, bud, because there's a fourth nation.
Oh God, you're right.
The most oppressed people in the United States.
Oh God.
Where is Geronimo? Where is Geronimo?
I think Geronimo
geographically.
I don't know enough about him.
Geronimo's
to be honest.
Apache.
New Mexico and Arizona.
Okay,
basically,
I'm just trying to orient.
As well as the north parts of Mexico.
Okay, I'm just trying to orient myself. That's all.
Yeah. So he's south of the great state of Deseret. I just want to see a map of this setting, and it looked like the most chaotic thing imaginable.
Yeah, I think like there would be blossoming native nation states that Geronimo fosters in all of these states. I think perhaps John Brown would be like doing some separatist stuff down south. Yeah, I guess it'd be splintered. I guess America would be patchwork.
Yeah, John Brown is
certainly
raiding,
the West would be. Certainly the West would be, because that's where all this is seeping out from, you know?
Right, I mean, the West would be absurdly,
Yeah. I think the East, they still have the railroads there, and they still have the unity and strength of government to hold stuff together for a little bit.
Right. By 1845, there was a lot of infrastructure already there, so it makes sense.
But did you have more to add on the government, Daniel?
Oh, the only thing I wanted to clarify was that, like, what John Brown is doing is he is raiding into the Confederacy to try and liberate more slaves.
Well, the Confederacy doesn't exist yet, but it will.
Missouri, Texas, Arkansas, maybe Louisiana even, but
the Texarkana.
Future site of the Confederacy.
Yeah,
Watch
he
this
had
space.
it on lock. He knew what would happen.
I mean, those are the slave holding states. So.
Right. Okay. So I want to get to Walt.
Yeah. So
Tell me about the Mormons.
let's talk about the Mormons. The Mormons have been kicked out of 2 states by now. They settled in Salt Lake City, Utah. The year's 1859, so the wife counter that Brigham Young has is going exponentially up. He's in double digits right now, easily. Polygamy and the excesses of Mormonism under Brigham Young are in full swing.
The Lion of the Lord.
The Lion of the Lord, indeed. This is something I wanted to address. So the Mormons, Joseph Smith, before he was killed by a mob, he gave a speech in the 1830s called the White Horse Prophecy.
Sounds ominous.
Where he talks about the United States Constitution, and he says that there will be one day when the U.S. Constitution is threatened, and the Mormons will have to step in on a white horse and save the country. And that is what they believe is happening now with the Devils. They believe that the way to save the country is not just to have a unified state of Deseret, but to have a Mormon theocracy that rules from Washington under Brigham Young or the church elders, basically. They have cut off in real history, the Mormon Wars were happening around this time, which were a short series of wars between 1858 and 59 between the Mormons and the U.S. government that never really turned out in any concrete engagements. This, obviously, with the advent of conflict shit-stirring Devils fucking with the stability of the region, I think we can feel safe to say that this war is going to be more chaotic and more lethal than it currently, than it was in the real world.
Which was already pretty fucking bad. It was for the longest. The Civil War was for, I think, until World War II, the single greatest source of American death in the
It's still number one.
Yeah.
It's still? Holy shit. Okay.
Yeah, by far.
Yeah, the most casualties of any war America participated in is Civil War.
Another fun fact on that, the state that had the highest percentage of KIA casualties is Kansas in the Civil War.
Oh, that makes sense.
Shit.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so Walt, go on.
So, the governor of the state of Deseret is Governor Brigham Young, who's been in office since 1851, so 8 years now. He's kept power throughout rising tensions with the U.S. government, which is culminating currently in the Mormon War, which is still ongoing. They're demanding annexation of the Colorado Territory into Deseret. The United States, obviously, I would imagine, is pretty, antithetical to this idea of this separate theocracy existing out there. One that is poked fun of in newspapers around the country. Around this time, Mormons are a laughingstock in the United States. They're super weird. People don't like them. They're made fun of all the time. But through that, they kind of built their own resistant culture where they endured a lot of criticism and they operated, they made their own legacy media and institutions and traditions. One of these is the Danites, the Destroying Angels, as they're called, a secret paramilitary Mormon group, more akin to a secret society that operated out of earlier Mormon settlements like Nauvoo and the settlement in Independence, Missouri that they had to abandon. The Danites...
Sorry.
Oh, yeah,
Sorry,
go on.
could I just get isolated? Could I get you to say secret paramilitary Mormon group again?
Secret paramilitary Mormon group.
Okay. I mean, it was laughing, but it's fine.
These guys are hated by the U.S. government. They're hated by the Indians as well because they perceive the Ute tribe to be in league with devils. There's a lot of cultural misunderstanding there. It's really Geronimo, who's we established actually made a contract and has supernatural power that he's using.
Well, right. Interestingly, Geronimo is an Apache.
Right.
So
he's
Geronimo
further
is not
south.
in the Utes.
Yeah. But they conflate a lot of Indians together, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think we can safely say the Mormons were pretty racist back then. Perhaps the most racist of all of our factions thus far.
Right. I think there was a sea change in the Mormons where because they think that Native Americans are lost tribe of Israel,
the
right?
Mormons believe that there were 4 tribes from Israel that came over here. In addition to the 12 tribes that were already over there mentioned in the Bible, they believe in these 4 tribes, and there are only 2 really important tribes. Really, there's only one important tribe, and that's
Right.
the Lamanites, who were they followed this Mormon prophet, or Israelite prophet, technically, who lived in the U.S., according to Mormon lore, called Lehi. So they believe that Native Americans, if they're not descendants of the Lamanites, they're descendants of these 3 kind of less righteous tribes. So that kind of justifies a lot of Mormon antipathy toward them.
Makes sense.
Okay, interesting. So I want the Mormons to be more aware of the devils than
I think
the populace at large. I think that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think too that because they're out there, I mean, their territory is practically right next to Pikes Peak. If you look at the old boundaries of the Utah territory that they governed, I think their primary goal is the annexation of Pikes Peak, which maybe the Danites have already gone and done, and are just waiting for the government to try and fight them while they're trying to locate the gate. They're also out in the United States trying to find Mendicus, wherever he might be. They believe he's the Antichrist. They think he started all of this, and they think that they're living in the end times.
Okay. Did they gain the knowledge of the devils from the devils? Like, did the devils appear to them?
So the Mormons, in their expulsion from Illinois by this point, in their expulsion from Illinois, they go towards Salt Lake City. Around 1846, I had sort of fluffed that the Mormons encounter the devils because the gate has been opened a year later, and that's while they're on their expedition there. So they're some of the first settlers to learn about them.
Well, they encounter the Utes, right? They encounter the Utes while the Utes are still in
they encounter the Utes as well.
That area.
But the gate is also open by the time they get there. They walk past it to get to Salt Lake City.
Right. I think the Utes probably would have called their attention to it at some point. They'd be like, don't actually go up to Pikes Peak. People don't go to Pikes Peak anymore.
Dramatic irony. The Utes actually explain some stuff and point them in the right direction and get totally disregarded after.
Oh my god!
Perfect.
That's great. I like to imagine that they do have Pikes Peak now, and then I don't know what the scope of Mormon wars against the U.S. government would be like.
Well, what if they're the paladins? What if they're the ones who are trying to uproot the devil influence?
They are. They're trying to find contracts.
Big success, but...
Yeah.
I think they've had some success. They're a fanatical group. They're more fanatical even than the abolitionists in terms of what they believe in, because this is the first time any supernatural stuff has ever happened. And their book, they're kind of in the right place at the right time for supernatural shit. So I'd imagine that once all this devil shit gets around, there are ironically a lot more Mormon converts to Mormonism.
Well, and there's people fleeing the east, like in the strife there as well. And like people going west. People are going west on the trails still this entire time, right? But they're going through all this violent landscape in Bleeding Kansas. So I think if they encounter the Mormons and they're a relatively stable group in the West while all this is going on, people take comfort in and are more likely to convert to religious movements like that in those situations.
The Mormons are the ones pledging to stop the apocalypse from happening, according to their lore. So they're acting out of the most sense of urgency, I think, within all the groups.
Sorry, did you say the Danites were the ones specifically hunting for devils?
I think the Danites would be involved in more of the military aspect.
Okay.
Mormonism's, because Joseph Smith was a Mason, he incorporated a lot of Masonic elements into Mormonism. And it was a religion that was awash with all these secret societies pretty much right off the bat from the get-go. It was how they kept people in. He recognized you needed a lot of ritual to do that. The Danites were only one of these. They were more of a military arm, and they kind of went quiet after some bad business in Missouri that got a lot of people killed. they kind of had to operate in secret. Now they're operating in the open once again from the freedom of the West, but there could be another secret Mormon society dedicated to going abroad. They're granted like exemption from typical Mormon behaviors. They're allowed to lie. They're allowed to act duplicitously in service of their goal. And they're kind of the espionage faction.
Oh.
So if they're the espionage faction, or just like the Mormons in general, how do you think that they figure out who is contracted, who's gifted?
I think, unfortunately, in this time period, it would be a lot of rumor, right?
Yeah,
it would
like
be a lot of
Salem witch trial
suspicion.
type. Yeah,
Exactly. Especially with the state of the press in this time period was not super informative to people. So people would just publish shit that would get people killed all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And it's,
Yeah. Oh, I'm imagining like they know on some level that Mendicus, like they start to catch on that there are these centers that crop up where Mendicus has like maybe opened a new gate, maybe caused something to happen that causes like a upwelling of new devils in the area. They know that, but sometimes very often actually they get it totally wrong and they go to a completely different place.
Yeah, or they kill someone, like, because if they can't destroy the contract, the next best thing is like, well, actually, since destroying the contract would kill you, and we've already been granted authority by God to like kill people who explicitly deal with the devil, and we suspect you of it, we're going to kill you anyway. So it would be a lot of just murder of people. Like, I'd imagine finding a contract would be pretty rare.
Does a contract still persist if someone dies? Like the actual paper it's written on.
That's interesting. Belvin?
I don't think so. I mean, it could just be useless paper. It could burn up. I don't have a strong feeling either way.
I think it'd be interesting if the Mormons forged contracts after they killed someone to say, look, we found his contract. What we did was... I think there'd be a lot of that happening, actually.
Hell yeah.
So...
Oh, but the reality is that if you kill someone who has a contract, the contract is like this metaphysical, like, creation of the gray
it's
world.
Very hard.
So it just vanishes.
Yeah, so there actually is no... they're all fake. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think that if there are a bunch of people running and gunning for people who sign contracts, it would encourage the actual signatories of contracts to be a lot more subtle in what they ask for, so as to not be detected right away.
And what is interesting is, too, that there are going to be, especially in Missouri, signatories of these contracts that are pro-slavery and are specifically currying favor with the Mormons because they are not abolitionists. So you're going to have plantation owners in Mississippi making deals to fund and send supplies to Mormons because they represent a counterweight that is pro-slavery, while being under the influence of the devils and being actively hunted by them.
Right.
Oh yeah, we didn't mention, of course, that I don't really want to go too deep into it. Well, luckily, we're saying this near the end of the episode.
Near the midpoint of the episode, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we got another like couple hours out of this. Mormons, very not for black people. Very anti-African Americans.
No, absolutely not.
They had not reversed their stance.
It's
on
funny
that.
because there were black Mormons at this time period. Joseph Smith, we don't really know his position on slavery, but Brigham Young was very, very pro-slavery. And that was kind of due to, I think, like a lot of the political ambitions that he had at the time. Joseph Smith, too. I mean, Joseph Smith ran for fucking president in like 1840. He lost to Polk. But like Joseph Smith's actual goal was like to become president of a theocracy. And I think that's still the goal in this setting, in early Mormonism. They're a religion that has seen exponential growth. Nothing but that since they were founded at this point in their history. And so they're riding a high.
I mean, that was basically part of Joseph Smith's like intellectual legacy of the white horse prophecy. On its face, it sounds like he's saying that Mormons will take control of the government.
Yeah.
Well, and like Smith and Young, both of them like kind of exemplify like a messiah archetype, right? Like, or a great preacher. I mean, getting stoned to death by a mob because they don't like what you're preaching is like the most preacher thing ever to do.
What's funny too is Brigham Young, and I was doing some research. Joseph Smith was like the prophet archetype, but Brigham Young was much more of the guy who he was like the administrative guy. Mm-hmm. And he was the guy every religion at this stage actually needs a transition from just prophet shit all the time to a person who's unpleasant to be around and can kind of get things done through the force of their personality.
You've got the face and you got the grease man.
Right, he was the grease man. He was a bruiser for Joseph Smith. He was a bodyguard for him before he became head of the church.
And you got to have a forceful fucking personality to convince a whole bunch of people to go set up shop in the desert around a useless lake.
Well, there were a ton of Mormons who didn't. They told Brigham Young to fuck off. In fact, when Joseph Smith died, it prompted the schism of Mormonism into like 7 different sects. But we're not going to go into that, I think. It's too much into real history, and it's kind of boring for the listener.
Yeah.
Also, we're at 1 hour and 7 minutes, so that's the other thing.
This is a Mormon podcast now, so get ready for that.
I think we are definitely approaching the point where we're going to have to start wrapping it up.
Well, I think we you got some good Mormon content in there. I think we have effectively fleshed out the setting in more detail. I feel like I understand more what's going on. I think we found some cool new stuff.
I would like to introduce the character of Brigadier General of the United States Army, Fraser Crane.
Yeah!
Now we can
finally. We're getting somewhere.
Niles,
Fraser reference.
These Indians are just bad.
A guy wants a devil to make him more charismatic and also detestable, but still watchable. He goes, "I know a character for you." He makes him Fraser Crane from
Fraser early
from hundreds of years in the future.
Fraser is a stage play that the Devils actually brought from
Oh my god, is Fraser Crane like
that's our show?
It's like there's a great Sandman story where William Shakespeare is given his great gift by Morpheus the Sandman in exchange for some favors. The equivalent in this setting is a playwright is given the gift to make the best work of all time.
Frasier.
And he makes 11 seasons of Frasier for the stage.
11 different reviews. Yeah, Frasier, the musical comedy.
Yeah, it's a cycle. A grand opera.
Folks, that's our show, I think. Anyone got anything else to add?
No, I think my favorite new element was the Django Unchained style, new success of the minority factions. I think that's cool.
Love Geronimo was a really cool guy.
I liked the Geronimo arc because it wasn't something I'd thought about, so that was kind of my favorite element.
I might be conflating Geronimo and Tecumseh, but
listen,
I think what if in this, let's say here's a new sting. Forget this Fraser Crane shit. Geronimo and Tecumseh join forces.
Okay,
there we go.
That's
it.
Southwest Native Confederation.
I'm sure that map will make perfect sense. And if you want to email us that map of all the shit we described, you can email us at 30minuteworlds@gmail.com. If you like the episode, subscribe to us.
Geronimo, sorry. Tecumseh was in. Tecumseh died in 1813. Never mind.
You have interrupted my ending spiel 3 times, sir.
It's just fine.
You know what? Thanks for listening, and as always, happy world building. That's it. I'm not going to do the ending spiel.
Bye.